Hey there, so I'm going to be doing a recap of the first PQ weekend that we got for the Set 3 cycle. First batch of major tournaments that happened on January 4th and January 5th. Additionally, we had a big round of tournaments in SCG Atlanta. There was a Friday 1K, a Saturday 2K, and a Sunday 1K. So lots of events. We're getting tons of results now. So I'll be covering kind of the overall results and then also previewing or reviewing some decks that did well, whichever ones that we have managed to get access to so far. I'll be using SWU Competitive Hub, which is an awesome site for tournament results. I'm going to have that link in the description so you can keep up to date there, as well as more results come in throughout the week. We might get more deck lists and things like that. So I'm going to cover as much as possible with what I have available to me so far. And yeah, we'll take it from there. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps out the channel. And go check out my Patreon. I do a lot of cool things there with deck updates, as well as a new tier that just came out with a really large description that you can check out for yourselves. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the tournament results. All right, so now I'm going to get into the tournament recap. This website is SWU Competitive Hub. This is run by Charles, or NOXM, on Discord, so big shout out. This is an awesome resource if you're someone that's interested in tournament results, meta reports, data, deck lists. This really helps me out, of course, because I have a place to go to with a lot of information all in one place, and I don't have to go to a bunch of different sources to find results and things like that. So yeah, definitely check out this website. But we are going to start with the recap of the PQs that happened this weekend. I'll go over the metadata afterwards, where we have aggregate information about top eights. Then I'm also going to recap the SCG tournaments, and do note that these SCG tournaments that happened this weekend, a lot of them were bigger than a lot of the PQs, so very relevant tournaments there as well. They were not small. We had some actually pretty small PQs though. So we'll go to the tournament results article, and I'm going to go through these, and we'll pick some decks to review. Of course, not all the decks have been uploaded yet. We'll see. Do check back to the site to see if more decks get added and more results. But here's the one from Barcelona. It's a 55-person event with a Sabine ECL taking it down, and a Django Blue, an off-meta deck, in the finals. Then there were two more other Sabines, two Django Tarkin Towns, and then another couple off-meta things in a mono green Palp and a really off-meta Cassian Yellow. Interestingly enough, we'll see through some of these PQs, a lot of the winners and finalists were actually off-meta, things that I wouldn't say are some of the top 8 represented decks. They were definitely some off-meta stuff. But outside of that, the majority of the decks that made top 8s were decks that you would expect, especially if you followed my tournament report from last week, or the PQ prep report, where I had Django and Bosk, and then Han and Quinlan, and then followed that with Sabine and Cad Bane, and the blue-green heroes, and the blue-green villains like Kieran Krennic, and the red-blue heroes like Anakin and Rey and Palpatine. Those were the decks that I most anticipated, and what you will see is that basically all 9 of those archetypes were represented as the top archetypes. But let's start with this Sabine ECL winner. So this does have some spice. You see Ayala Sakura at the top there. This, I think, is used primarily to combat Lieutenant Chilton out of boss decks, because while Poe can still one-shot a Chilton and survive, he always does so with very little health remaining, and Ayala can often prevent all the damage she takes back and leave behind a much bigger threat. So outside of that, we have some other things that you don't normally see in Sabine, like a Jyn Erso. I find her 2 health to be a little problematic, but she's not bad, and she's a rebel. What I don't really like here, but I mean, this person won, so who am I to critique? But only one K2 seems wild to me. I think that card needs to be a 3 of in every Sabine deck. But Lieutenant Admiral Yularen as an additional 3 has been decent at times. I've seen that pop up in some Sabine lists. I see one Heroic Resolve. I see no Medal Ceremonies, which is a card I like in Sabine. The sideboard here looks like a lot of anti-boss stuff with like the Spec Force, Wolf, and Disabling Fangfighter. We also see 2 Bright Hopes in the side. I see those sometimes make appearances in main decks, primarily for like the Django matchup, but they have some fringe uses elsewhere. And they can remove bounties as well off of your ground units. And 2 U-Wings if you're looking to grind a little more. Not something I usually do, but it's an option. And we're going to look at the Spicy Django Blue. Here is what we got. So this deck has 6, 12, 18, 24, 27 unique cards in it. It is definitely a strange archetype. This, I think, would be like the cousin of the Boba Blues from the previous set. Now I see archetypes like this most commonly with Cad Bane. They are always like a little present, but not highly present in most metas. Right when I look through this deck, I'm only seeing one card, like exactly one card, and that's the Elite P-38 Starfighter that has any synergy with Django's leader. I actually see a lot of Underworld units, which would have a ton more synergy with a Cad Bane, for instance. There's not much you can do with this Django leader's ability. Of course, you do get the Fet's Fire Spray. There's a couple copies in here. It's the other thing that like directly works with Django. But this is like a control deck, basically, but it's not usually going to go for like a hard control victory route with like a vigilance and restock, although it has that option, especially in mirrors, where I think a deck like this can really thrive because it has access to Bazine and Bounty Hunter Crew, both which are very good against hard control, especially when you don't have to pay extra for them. Like a lot of these boss decks and sometimes Iden decks run these cards out of aspect, but a yellow leader like Django and Cad Bane, which we'll actually see a Cad Blue that did really well at one of these PQs also, they can run that. But overall, I can't really nitpick here and like discuss this too much. This is not a deck I've ever played, like Django Blue. And there's so many different cards in here. Like you see a bounty package with a fine addition. You see a lot of 1-ofs and 2-ofs. It's looking to grind for sure. But I don't have like much information to give you about how this particular list would be playing out. And then the only other list here we can see is Cassian Yellow, but that's pretty awesome that we can check this out. Here we have a full space aggro deck. So the only ground unit is K2SO, which, of course, is being used to burst damage and just be guaranteed reach. But other than that, it's all space units, all pumps, some buffs, and yeah, outmaneuver here to help you race against ground decks, because ground decks usually deal more damage than you. I've played versions of this with like Han before, the first Han, kind of reverse Cassian, where instead of getting card advantage, you're getting card disadvantage for resources. You can do versions of this with Sabine, for instance. You can even do Han 2 with this. The core here is that you are only presenting space units, and you're just trying to race ground decks. You have outmaneuver and a bunch of pumps. Where Cassian is better, I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't say personally that I think he would be better than something like a Han or a Sabine doing this deck because of how slow he comes out. It makes racing a little more difficult, but he does give you a little more longevity, right? Because you can draw extra cards, you can find more reach. And this deck has a lot of pumps and a lot of ways to do damage out of nowhere. See one copy of the Chaos of War, which is interesting. A couple more in the sideboard. But yeah, this is pretty cool, and it's nice to see like weird decks. Although I don't expect something like this to ever become popular, it's still cool to see that like any given tournament, some random deck can spike in the hands of a good player and make a top 8. So that's what happened in Barcelona. Now here's the France PQ. Now we have all the lists for this one. It's the only event that actually has links to all the lists. This is a 62-player event. I'm not going to review every single list here, but what we do have is a winner with Kira Green, second place with Boss Green, 2 Han Yellows, 2 Cad Tarkin Towns, a Bosk Blue, and a Sabini CL. So this is all meta outside of like the Boss Green deck, which, you know, is still just like right under meta. It's a deck that floats in and out of like people playing it. I'm gonna look at the finalist here. This deck, this Kira 30, is actually the exact same main deck from the video that I made a couple weeks ago. That video is almost 2 hours long, so if you actually want a deep dive onto this archetype, do recommend checking that out. It's the same main deck. The sideboard is 9 out of the 10 same cards. There's a Devastator here, where that video I had to make an opening there. But I am really hyped to see that someone took Kira to a PQ and won, because, you know, I've been a big proponent of thinking this deck is powerful. I've not rated it as one of like my top 5 in this set, but I have it in that next bucket of decks that I include, like blue-red hero decks and like Palpatine and like things like that, like things that are maybe not quite as likely to like be as prominent, but are certainly powerful enough to win PQs. And here we have some proof that this is powerful enough to win some PQs. So for sure, we're going to see a couple other Kiras made it top 8, and a couple Krennic Greens as well, similar archetype. So if you are interested in this kind of deck, do check out that video. I spent a lot of time making it, had some good feedback on it. So yeah, check it out. I'm going to look at the second place deck as well, because this is a little different than things we normally see. It's a boss green. It's a big ramp deck. So this is not like aggro boss deck. This is turbo ramp. It's playing 9 ramp cards: Super Laser Tech, Resupply, and Price on Your Head Bounty. It's not even playing that many bounties. Outside of that, it's only playing the Bounty Hunter's Quarry. And look at this top end: 3 Vader, 3 Maul, 3 Walkers, Palps, Crates, Devastator. This is ramp and play big things deck. Even Ruthless Raider, right? This is just chunky stuff. Very little interaction. I think in many cases, if you don't draw the right open fire or force choke, or even like the barrage early, you might be in a world of hurt against anything doing aggro. But it's trying to get to these giants as quickly as possible, because then they start acting as your removal. This is a pretty cool build. In the sideboard, you see Clients here, and I've played Top Target out of Aspect in a deck like this. I've never tried Client. I think 5 for the Client is a lot, but I think the theory here is you're mostly pulling it out of Vader or Bounty Hunter's Quarry. You're not really trying to pay 5 for it. And then, you know, Scanning Officers are a good anti-Mono Yellow Han, and that's going to be important because Mono Yellow Han had an absolutely absurd weekend. We're going to find out. That deck, as well as Sabini CL and Quinlan Tarkin Town, were probably the 3 most successful decks on the weekend. The Han Yellows, I'm not going to look at these because SCG is where I'm going to cover Han. There was a lot of Han at SCG, including a Han winner there. So we'll cover Han a little later, but I will open up this Cad Tarkin Town, which is another pretty popular deck. It does struggle primarily into Django because Lurking TIE Phantom, and it has just a difficult time racing on the ground versus those exhausting abilities that Django presents. But this is kind of the best deck for now. There are 2 of them, so if you're into that combo, this is probably where you want it. You get Bosks and Zuckuses on turn 2 with that. You can even get a Cad Bane out early. It's probably the deck that uses Cad Bane most effectively as well. But this is not an aggro deck. This is a unit-based control deck, basically. It's like a mid-range deck that aims to control the board with its pings, its Tarkin Towns, its removal with like McClunky, and its ambush units to just slowly get more units in play than your opponent has in play, and then start pushing damage, of course. It plays a big trick package that Jabba utilizes pretty well. Out of the sideboard, you see a lot more chunk that this person wanted to add, like Fenix, Emperors, a Crate Dragon even. Daring Raids are good into Django and have some use cases against other matchups as well. I, in fact, actually play Daring Raid in my main deck in Cad Bane, but I understand the sideboard angle as well. All right, we're not doing the Han. We're going to look at the other Sabine. Let's just see if we can spot any differences here. So, yeah, like no Ayala here. Only 1 Darksaber. And Darksaber does steal games. You can sometimes even play like General's Blade instead of Darksaber if you play more 1-drops, because then you can play a 1 and a 3. I see Dodonna has made his way back into this particular deck. But yeah, the core here remains. This one does not have Timely Intervention in the main, although it's playing it in the sideboard. And Bright Hopes are, in fact, in the main here. And then let's take a look at Bosk Blue. So Bosk Blue recently won a giant event by Thork in the UK. This is the de facto hard control deck of the format right now. Very few units. It's just a grind out removal deck, and then it finishes you off with this blue-red top end, or potentially with the Vigilance restock package. This particular version opts for pillages in the main deck, probably more against like blue-green villain decks. Maybe it's okay in the mirror, although in my opinion, the best stuff for the mirror matches end up being the yellow cards, things like Bounty Hunter's Crew and Bazine, stuff that we mentioned in the Django coverage. And I'll mention again in the Cad Bane blue later, but those cards are kind of how you win mirror matches, and usually the person that plays more of those in the main deck has the advantage, because oftentimes you're only finishing one game in a mirror, and if you lose game one, it's very difficult to win two more after that. And that's why I do know some people prefer to just opt into having those stuff in the main deck. Outside of that, yeah, the units are basically utility, right? Pershing is draw, Client is heal, and then you've got this one brick wall in Lieutenant Charlton, and then that's it. Like after that, it's just units are your finishers. All right, so I think that's good for the France one. Iowa, I only have one list here, which we'll definitely look at, but this is a Han Yellow victory, so, and a Quinlan finalist. So those two decks had very good weekends, and actually the third place here, Sabine, like I said, those were the three most dominant decks this weekend. After that, we had the next three were probably Django, Tarkentown, Bosk Blue, and Cad Tarkentown. So, but nothing really matched these top three. And then we see a Palp Blue here. We saw Palp Green before. I think we'll see one more Palp Green and a couple Palp Yellows as well. So Palp had like overall, like the Palp archetype, not any one individual color, had decent showings. Django ECL is an interesting take. Don't know what the list is, but I'll check back to see. Hopefully it comes up. Another Kira Green and a Krennic ECL. So these are two more of the blue-green archetype. And then the Spice is Asajj, and let's take a look at Asajj Red here. So this is another space-focused aggro deck. It's playing triple Dark Grade. Now, unlike Django, who gets to use Fire Spray more effectively, this opted for ATST as its other big chunky vehicle in addition to Ruthless Raider. It's also playing 3 copies of Sneak Attack. What's interesting about these cards with Asajj is that both of them are events that bring out a unit, which then triggers Asajj's ability. You can then attack for +1 with those units. So you get a little incremental bonuses with that math. Other cool things here, of course, is Asajj's Force unit. So you get to play Force Throw. They added Fifth Brother to this deck in order to trigger that more reliably. And then we've got 3 Tie Advance to try to, really cheese people out with Lurking Tie. There's a lot of pumps in this deck, which is, I think, makes sense because of Asajj, right? You're trying to get extra damage with her. That's kind of the benefit here. You got a cheap leader that pushes a little bit of extra damage. The sideboard looks like a lot of cheap interaction. Force Choke, no good, and Waylay, so probably for Sabine, probably for mirrors, or like, not like Asajj mirrors, that's probably not playing any of those, but maybe into like Django or other decks racing you. The Fang Fighter is probably for removing bounties, and then Cad Bane. In addition to Savage in the Savage or Savage, however you pronounce it, in the main deck, it'll give you a lot more endgame chunkiness. All right, here's the Wisconsin PQ. Now we finally see a Quinlan Tarkentown win one. There's no deck list that I can show you here, but we have the reverse finalists, Quinlan and Han here. Han in second place, and then we have again a Sabine in third place. Here we do see another Krennic ECL. We see another Quinlan, another Sabine ECL, and then a Django and a Sabine Yellow. But this is mostly meta stuff, and this was a pretty big event over in Wisconsin, and neat to see Quinlan take one, and I've been pretty high on that deck as well. Here is a small PQ. So this one was only 37 players in Lincoln, Nebraska, and this one probably has some more different things, right? We're seeing finally seeing a couple blue-red heroes in Rey and Anakin in this top 8. I think those decks are, personally, I think they're fine. I think they're good enough probably to maybe win a little bit, but overall, I have them a bit below the real top decks in my mind. I don't think they're always like well positioned into this particular meta. We see another Kira over here as a finalist, another Han, Palpatine ECL, which is cool. I wish we could see that list, and then Jango and Bosk. But let's take a look at the Cad Bane Blue. So this is going to look pretty similar to that Jango Blue we saw. And again, this is like an adaptation from the Boba Blues from the last set, which were never like highly popular, but always had some decent success when they were played. This makes much better use of this Underworld theme, right? Because you're getting that Cad Bane ability to really go off. Works really well with the ambush units that this deck presents. Now, it's not playing Cloud Rider, but that's another option for an Underworld ambusher that works really well in a deck like this. You still have the Vigilance restock package here. Decent amount of removal, right? It's not like a hard control in the sense that like Bosk is, right? It's playing, most of its interaction here is still unit based. It plays like enough removal to interact outside of that, but it's trying to do a lot of its heavy lifting with unit combat. You lose Target Town, which is a big get for Cad Bane, but the blue stuff does give it a little more like sturdiness into like a wide field, right? Because the blue cards they work into a lot of decks. And the red cards in general, although I still really like Target Town, we know that we're basically playing it for Target Town and Ruthless Raider. That's kind of like the only reason we're even playing red. And this deck does actually feature a lot of blue, way more than the red version features red. So a cool thing. We'll see if Cad Blue ends up taking larger shares. I don't expect it to be honest. I think this will still be more of an off-meta choice, but we'll see if more people pick it up. Here in Fargo, North Dakota, it's another small one. It's a 47-person event. Boss Green took one down here. We have another Anakin showing up, and then 2 Quinlins, 2 Jangos, Bosk and Sabine, right? Meta. Everything's meta here except maybe the Boss Green, and even Boss Green is like almost meta. And then in Illinois, we had a massive one. So this is 114 players, and we have another sort of off-meta deck winning this whole thing. It's Quinlan ECL. I do have a link to this deck, so we'll open that in a second. But other than that, we see a Quinlan Tarkentown with we see 2 Sabine Greens, a Bosk, a Cad Tarkentown, but then a couple other sort of more fringe decks like an Iden Yellow, which is going to be a hard control deck in the same vein that Bosk Blue is, except, you're playing yellow so that you can play those like things like Bazine and Bounty Hunter Crew without penalty in a deck like that. And then Han Green is usually not as widely spread as like a Han Yellow, of course. It does have a really grindy top end with U-Wing and Home 1, and the games where you play resupply early feel so much different when you're playing Han Green than the games where you don't. It's been a big reason why I haven't usually opted into it, is because of how much different games feel. And of course, when you're playing a villain green deck, you get 6 copies of Ramp, and unfortunately, Spark of Hope never ended up being quite the card that Super Laser Tech is. So these decks don't often get as reliable Ramp as the villain versions. But let's take a look at Quinlan ECL, which initially, when like the set was first announced and first playtesting was starting, this was I think a pretty popular idea. Now this deck has a lot of choice, like cool, interesting, weird choices, however you want to describe it. I'm going to mention a few things that I think are core to wanting to do something with Quinlan ECL. And Ayala Sakura is probably number 1 here, because she's kind of your de facto good ECL target. Especially with Quinlan, it means she can hit essentially for 7 damage, which means that you can one-shot a lot of leaders like other Quinlins, Krennics, Jangos, right? That's pretty important. And General's Blade is kind of the other core piece here, because of course he's a Jedi, but also a very sturdy leader to flip, and you turn him into a 6/10. That's pretty wild. Now, usually when I've played with General's Blade in a deck like this, I've included stuff like Home 1, because the next turn you can immediately play Home 1. This curve actually stops basically at 5. I mean, there's one Millennium Falcon here, but this curve, there's no Hans in this main deck. There's no U-Wings. There's no Home 1. There's no 7s or 8s or anything like that, right? So the General's Blade's still really good because, I mean, it lets you play 2 units, right? You still discount cheap units. But it is interesting to me to see that Han didn't even make an appearance here, or like Home 1, because I feel like those are good reasons to be in this color. But I wouldn't have thought to make a deck like this, and this deck won. So that's really cool to see, right? There's a lot of interesting choices here, like Bounty Hunter's Quarry, not a card you usually see get played outside of boss decks. One Frontline Shuttle, that's pretty cool card. Can work well with some of these chunky units that just let them attack again. You see Cobb Vanth here. Tex, of course, will help you grind. The sideboard does have a U-Wing and 2 Hans. And you also actually no Spark of Rebellions in the main deck, so there's no hand hate at all here. This looks a little more aggro-y than what I essentially would think of as a Quinlan ECL. Like, if I hadn't seen this list, I probably wouldn't have thought it would have been as low to the ground as it ended up being. But it's definitely cool to see this deck do well. Over in Las Vegas, we have a 70-player one and another kind of off-meta deck winning. It's Iden Blue. Again, it's a hard control deck variant of the Boss Blue shell. Iden Blue gets to do Vigilance for 4, so that's the big get there, right? Like, that's the main thing. Vigilance for 4 is a crazy powerful effect. We see 2 more Cad Tarkin Towns. We see another Quinlan Tarkin Town, another Kira Green, and then Anakin Blue, Palp Yellow, and another Han Green. So Palp, cool to see. A yellow one, I think we're going to see 1 or 2 more of these Palp Yellows show up. And Palp, always have to wonder if the Palp was just able to dodge all the Sabines on their way to the top 8. Here is a 42-person one in Italy. Small event, but Sabine ECL takes it down. We got a Fennec as a little bit of an off meta showing. A couple Han Yellows, a Hondo Yellow. I would love to see what this deck looks like. Maybe one day it'll be up here. 2 more Quinlans and a Palp Yellow. So, like I said, another Palpatine found its way into this top 8. And then the last one I'm going to cover for now is the PQ in Germany. It's 116 players, so it's the biggest one. And we have 3 Han Yellows in this top 8, including a Han Yellow mirror in the finals. We have a third Palp Yellow show up. And then Quinlan Tarkentown, Fennec Tarkentown, and Iden Blue and a Sabine CL. So, in each of these events, we saw like maybe 1 or 2 off meta, and then the rest was mostly meta. And that was kind of the trend I was picking up on. The 3 other PQs here that I don't have results for yet, so do check back on the website if you're interested to see what happened there. I'm going to go over kind of the overall meta, and then we're going to do the Star City events as well. So this is what we got. I'm going to start with the right column here. So this is top 8 appearances from the PQs to date, which include everything that happened this weekend, and then the one that happened a few weeks ago, where I believe a Cad Tarkentown actually took that one down. So number 1 in top 8 appearances by a long shot was Sabine ECL, and Sabine continues to be a heavily played deck with just huge power spikes in it. When I made my PQ prep video, I had Sabine as kind of the 5th deck on my list. I had Boskin Django as 1-2. And although they are in the top 6 here, they finished 5 and 6 in terms of top 8 appearances. I had Quinlan and Han as 3-4, and that's right here, 10 appearances each. And then I had Sabine and Cad as like 5 and 6. And of course, Sabine far exceeded that. Sabine was the definite number 1 here in terms of top 8 appearances. It also won 2 PQs. So Sabine starting with a bang here in the early weeks, and Han and Quinlan both right there as well with 10 top 8s each. Really like both of those decks. They're both like hero disruptive decks, right? They both play a lot of discard and hand hate and just really make your life annoying. Han gets to be even more annoying with like its DJ stuff. Quinlan gets Force Throw, so they both kind of have a little bit of a cheating thing going on. And then Cad, Bosk Blue, and Django kind of wrap up the top 6, and it is the top 6 that I kind of predicted, just not in the order I predicted they would be in. After that, we have kind of a splash of stuff, but I am going to combine the Kira and Krennics into like one archetype, which puts them right at 5 as well. And then the Palps, if you combine all the Palps, also have 5 or 6. So they were kind of the next tier with Rey and Anakin, which combined are also 5. So you have like a bucket of these that, in fact, if you combine them into their shells, are in the same kind of territory as like the Cad, Bosk, and Django finishes currently. But those are the decks that I would mostly be preparing for, right? The 6 that we see here, and then the blue-green villains, the red-blue heroes, and the Palpatines of various color combinations. That's how I currently approach the meta. It's how I approached it when I made the prep video, and I will continue to approach it that way because it basically, the results confirmed that. One deck that I am going to keep my eye on, or a couple actually, is going to be Han Green. We're going to see if it makes more push into this meta. I don't lump that with Han Yellow because it is quite a different archetype. And then the Boss Green is another thing that I want to kind of keep in the periphery and think about. Outside of that, you know, hard control, there were Idens, there was 2 Iden Blues and an Iden Yellow. So if you want to combine hard control into one archetype with the Bosk, it definitely ramps up in popularity because I do think those decks are fairly similar, even though they don't all do the exact same thing. If we review winners, though, we see a much more varied metagame. Only 2 decks won 2, and that's Sabine and Han. And then we have, you know, some meta winning, like Cad Tarkentown and Quinlan Tarkentown, even like Kira. But then, like, some off-meta stuff, right? Boss Green, Quinlan Green, Cad Blue, Mono Blue Iden. So we know that, like, once you get to a top 8, if you're a good player, good matchups, you can spike an event. And I'm sure that a lot of these players, even playing with off-meta things, were able to, outplay and just found the right day for their particular deck. And it's cool to be able to see that even though we do definitely have like a solid meta formed that has like 8 to 9 archetypes, which frankly is a good amount, that even so, you still are going to see some weird stuff win sometimes. All right, so we're going to do now the SCG. And like I mentioned earlier, these events were bigger than a lot of the PQs. So let's take them seriously here. So this is the 1K that happened on January 3rd. We had a Sabine ECL mirror. So again, adds to that Sabine dominance from this week. A Han Yellow in 3rd place. I'm going to look at this list in a moment. And then we had a couple blue-red heroes, a Django Tarkentown, a Quinlan Tarkentown, and a Palp Blue. Shout out to Symbiode, my friend who ran this Palp Blue. And shout out to this Han Yellow, which is my teammate Alex. He finished 3rd place at the 1K, and you're going to see he won the 2K the next day with this list. That's why we're reviewing it now, because it's the same deck. This is the Han Yellow that finished 3rd, and then he took it down the next day. So let's review here. So we see 6 copies of 2/2 shielded units, and this is a concession to this Tarkentown meta of like Quinlan, Cad, and Django. Being able to put down a sticky unit early proves really helpful for Han, who needs bodies on board, needs to be able to like accumulate value through units. A really interesting add to this deck is Zori Bliss. It's a 4/7, right? That is an obnoxious stat line to deal with for a lot of decks. It dodges a ton of removal, and it has this very powerful backup plan for the Han flip turn, where if Han is disrupted in any way, you can still play a 6-cost unit out of your smuggle. Similarly to how Millennium Falcon operates, but Zori is much stickier than the Falcon. We see a 2/2 split of Han and Enfys. Enfys, of course, can target space units, which is useful, and then has just proven to be quite a solid unit. There's a 3rd copy of each of these in the sideboard, so the full 6 is available. Outside of that, we know that this deck operates on this massive hand disruption angle that also features probably the most broken interaction in Star Wars Unlimited to date, which is DJ's interaction with Han. Being able to blow up a resource your opponent controls and permanently ramp yourself is out of control. Yeah, mono yellow Han bamboozles in the sideboard. That's going to help you with Sabines and other racing. Azutak gunships. That's going to help you with space aggro. And then Change of Heart. This, I think, at its core, it's best against blue-green villain decks. I think that's where it's going to shine the most. So again, shout out for Alex for hitting a top 4. And then, yeah, here's the 2K right here where this first place is Alex's again. And this second place, because, you know, is a Han mirror, that is Ian Klein from Boston Network. And he crushed with this deck in set 2. I know he won or topped a bunch of SCGs with this deck and also top 8'd some PQs with the mono yellow Han. You see an Anakin blue in 3rd, a Django Tarkentown. This is my other teammate that went to this event. This is Mike Gem. You probably know him as Bobby Sapphire over here in the picture. He took this Django to 4th place, actually got defeated by one of the Hans in the semifinals. If you want to check out, he has a video guide on the KTVD YouTube for Django Tarkentown. And rounding out the next 4 spots is another Django Tarkentown, a Han Red, which I'd like to see, a Cat Tarkentown, and a Hondo Blue. And although I don't have confirmation, I see George from Boston Network is in this picture, and I'm gonna go ahead, put 2 and 2 together and say that's probably him playing this Hondo Blue, because he played it a lot in set 2. I don't currently have the results from the Sunday one. This one was a bit smaller, only 41 players, but if you're interested in what happens in the last SCG tournament, come back to this website. I know as well that BN streamed day 1 of the SCG, and McClunky Gaming streamed day 2. So if you want to watch some actual gameplay from these decks, go check out their respective channels, and you'll be able to see some stuff in action. All right, that's what I got for this review. Again, shout out to this website and NOXM for running it. It makes my life so much easier. I will be updating my testing gauntlet over on Patreon with the results from these events. So if you're to just help people with their testing needs. So yeah, if you want to check out the Patreon and the new tier as well, click that link in the description. Please hit that subscribe button as well. And until next time, take care.